Oh, I love that song by Third Day. Big kind of hit song on Christian radio. I'm hearing it a lot. And it's a great reflection on being in those times in your spiritual life. It's like, man, God, I want to be at that place where I'm really feeling you, where you're really present, where I kind of walk every day and can talk about those times that, hey, God talked to me. Hey, God said this to me. Hey, God said that to me. And many of us in the room have had those times, and many of us in the room are probably in those times right now, but all of us in the room have also had the opposite times. And when I was young, probably my teenage years, I came back to church. Grew up in the church when I was a little tyke. We left when I was about 4th grade. Never went to church again. Had some fallout. I don't know what it was. My parents got mad at the church. Church got mad at them. Typical stuff. So they left. And around my sophomore year, freshman, sophomore year of high school, a buddy invited me to go to church with him. And so I, with not really knowing what I was in for, I went into this Holy Roller Pentecostal church youth group that my buddy invited me to. And the way I heard the gospel message presented to me sort of looked like this particular picture. It was, the way I heard the gospel is, you live in sin and darkness and you don't know God and you're separated from Him. And when you come to the cross of Christ and you recognize that Jesus was the Son of God and He died on the cross for your sins, and He rose again from the dead, and you accept Him into your heart, then you sort of cross over to this new, glorious, wonderful Christian side where life is good and things are excellent. And they had songs about being, now I am happy all the day that I've gotten Jesus, right? Songs about being, oh, so happy, happy, happy now that I have Jesus. And in that Pentecostal world, they were pretty good at holding that together. But over time, I realized that's true, but it's kind of incomplete. Because the real story looked more like this to me. Well, first off, before meeting Christ, not everything was bad. God had done some stuff in life. God had brought experiences and talents. There was some love. There was some friendship. It wasn't like completely black to completely wonderful. There was some good stuff God had done. So I kind of realized that. And then I realized you crossed over. It's like you haven't arrived. You have a long way to go. And so now through prayer and worship and Bible study and seeking God, now it's this upward steady climb towards you become more like Jesus. And I kind of realized this is really what I was being taught, is that it wasn't such a black and white thing. It wasn't such a death to life thing. Although that was true, there was a level at which I had to now participate in growing in Jesus. And it was going to be this ever upward, moving on up, becoming more glorious, becoming more like Jesus, becoming, less sinful as things went along. And by reading and praying and attending church and worshiping, doing Bible study, joining small groups, I could achieve this. How many of this is the story you've heard? Is this kind of, you're kind of getting, okay, this kind of story I've heard. And then I realized, well, that's not really the way it is either. In fact, it's probably a little more like this, right? I'm doing pretty good, and then I sort of collapse. And then I fall back. Now, in the Pentecostal circles, they called it backsliding. That was their term for it, which I hate that term because it implies that ground you have gained, you lost, and you have to recover the same ground. I don't think so. Once you've learned stuff about God, you've learned it. You know that. Once you've had experiences, they go into your catalog of experiences, and you know there's some truths about God that you don't let go of, that you don't forget. But I realized that it wasn't so smooth. It wasn't this ever upward, onward. It was a hit and miss. It was up and it was down, and it was my sin, and it was my inability to reach God, and it was sometimes my not wanting to know. And then there was dry times when I just didn't do the stuff. And so the journey was really more like this. Anybody relate yet? Anybody relate yet? Okay. And then I kind of realized for a while, this is it. And then as time has worn on, I've realized actually the spiritual life and the growth of becoming a soul on fire really often looks like this. For one thing, it's not all glorious and wonderful, that the world is difficult. There's questions you ask you don't get answers for. There's times of confusing, and you grow, and then there's these long, flat periods where I felt like I haven't grown at all. Where long, flat periods for years, it's just like everything's kind of becomes dry and dusty. It's the same old, same old. And in the long, dry periods, what I realize is, over time, even that which does sustain you begins to disintegrate on you. And the spiritual life never just goes away, it fades away. The spiritual life begins to crumble on you. And there comes a day when you're like, someone asks, when was the last time you heard God say something to you? You're like, wow. You mean God actually telling me something about my life? Ooh, boy. When was the last time you opened opened up a Bible verse and you knew that verse was specifically about you and your life right here, right now, and you're like, ooh, oh, you mean me? One actually just for me, not for humanity. Yeah, just for you. Ooh. And you realize the spiritual life doesn't switch off. It fades away like fog or mist. It crumbles on you. And there's seasons of life where you find yourself in this kind of neverland where you're lost. You're lost in this zone where you're like, I don't know what to do, because what they told me to do was read my Bible and worship God and pray, and I would just keep growing. And I've done that and I'm doing that until I'm tired of it. And I feel lost. Anybody ever had this season of life? If you haven't, you will. Where you look and the next rung up to grow in the spiritual life seems so far away. And all you know how to do is go back to the same old you've been doing, and it ain't working for you anymore. And you're lost, and you're confused, and you're sort of in these zones of, where are you, God? You're saying you want me, but I'm kind of in this lost zone, and even what I did have before has now crumbled and faded away, and I'm not going forward, I'm not falling, I'm just sort of hovering in this spiritless zone. But I still believe all the things I ever believed. I still know the truths that I have learned. I've still come to the acceptance of who Jesus is. I've learned stuff about God that I can't forget now that's in me. But I don't know that I'm feeling where this is going. This is actually a normal experience for deep spiritual growth. And these seasons of this time can only happen, you can only break this cycle when you learn to wrestle with God. Really wrestle with God. Now, if you grew up in church, you hear that phrase, and you probably immediately thought of, oh, there's a story in the Bible about a guy who wrestles God. Jacob, right? And I'm doing a series called Not Just for Kids, where I'm taking the old children's Bible stories that we never preach about anymore because we're off to bigger things as adults. And so we neglect them. Last week I did Jonah and the big fish. And I'm going to do the story of the time that Jacob wrestled with God and see what we can learn from it. So if you've got a Bible, turn with me to Genesis chapter 32. I'm going to be using my New King James Version, so it's a little different than the blue and white ones you have in front of you. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. So it'll be a little bit of difference when I read from what you read, but yeah, you'll be able to keep up with it. Who's got a page number for me if you're in the blue and white Bibles on the tables? What? 23. Right on. Early on. Okay. And let's pick up the story of Jacob wrestling God, or sometimes referred to as wrestling the angel. It says in chapter 32, verse 1 of Genesis, so Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. And then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, well, we came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies, and he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who has said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with my children. For you said, I will surely treat you well. I will make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered or for a multitude. Okay, pause a second. Let me give you some backstory on this guy if you don't know about him. 20 years ago, he had left home. He didn't leave home under good circumstances. He has a twin brother named Esau. All their life growing up, they were combative and they were always in conflict with each other, and they grew up as two different kinds of personalities. One Jacob grew up kind of watching out over the tents and taking care of things at home. He was kind of a mama's boy, and mama loved him a lot. And his twin brother Esau, who was slightly older, he was a man of the field. He was a hunter. He was a guy who went out. He was a man's man. He was always out doing radical, crazy things. And Dad loved him more. And so Mom loved Jacob, Dad loved Esau, and the two boys were always fighting with each other. And they had all of these various conflicts, but the real deal breaker came at one point in Dad's life. Dad thought he was dying. And he called the oldest son to him, actually, and he said, Esau, I'm dying, and before I go, I need to give you the blessing. Go out in the field, hunt me some game that I really like, bring it back to me, and when you're done, I will give you the blessing. Now, the blessing was a really important thing. It was sort of the inheritance. So off Esau goes to go hunting. Mom overhears it. She grabs Jacob, and she says to Jacob, hey, you're about to lose everything. It's going to go to your brother, so I got a plan. Let's dress you up like your brother, send you in, and you'll get the blessing pretending to be your older brother. And so he did that. And as a consequence was, when the brother came home, huge conflict emerges, and Esau's response was, when Dad dies, I'm going to kill you. That was it. I swore, I'm going to hold off till Dad dies. When Dad finally dies, I'm going to kill you. That's how big the conflict was. So Mom has to pull Jacob aside and say, well, I guess we didn't do this one right. And you need to find yourself a good wife, and you're not going to find a good wife where we're camping out here because there's all these other Canaanites and stuff around. You need to go get a good wife from the home country where my family's from. So she sends him on his way, and off he goes, journeying miles and miles back to his uncle Laban's place, where he's going to find himself a wife. And he gets to his uncle Laban's place, and he has an intention of being gone for a little while. He doesn't realize he'll be gone for 20 years. For 20 years. And irony of ironies, in those 20 years, Mom will die, and Dad won't. Dad's going to stay alive all this time. While he's over there with Laban, he ends up in this crazy circumstance where he has this girl he's in love with, and so he wants to marry her, and Laban tricks him and has him actually marry the uglier older sister, and they strike a deal where he can marry the younger one anyway, because they were polygamous in those days, trying to raise huge families because that was your protection. There was no army, there was no police force, there was no way to protect what you had unless you could fight for it. And so the only way to fight for it was to have sons. If you didn't have sons in a big family, you're doomed. Somebody's going to come and kill you and take everything you have. So you had to have a big family. So they were oftentimes more polygamous because having sons was important. So he marries the younger sister and the older sister. They're in conflict, and they're always in this competition of who can have the most sons. And before the old thing unfolds all the way, each of them also gives a servant to him. So he ends up with 4 wives. He ends up with 4 wives and 12 sons and 1 daughter out of this whole milieu. And then the whole time he's actually trying to he walked over, when he left Mom and Dad's, he had nothing but like a little backpack, a little knapsack of stuff he could eat on the way, and his walking stick, and he journeyed all that time. And when he ends up at Uncle Laban's house, now he's got these 4 wives and these 12 kids, or these 13 kids, 12 sons and a daughter, and the only way that he could get flocks and goats and sheep and cows, he didn't have any money to buy it. He had to work for it. So he had worked for the wives to pay the dowry, and then he had to work for Uncle Laban in this agreement that I'll work for you, and in the time that I work for you, every single goat that's born speckled and every sheep that's born black will be mine, and you'll have the rest. And then he schemed in such a way that he made sure through the breeding cycle that all of the offspring would be black sheep and all of the offspring would be speckled goats. So he kept getting his herds huge, and Laban kept seeing his go down, and then they were in conflict. And for 10 years, the wages got changed 6 times. Till their conflict with Laban was so great that suddenly Jacob's like, you know what? I got to get out of here and get back to my family. He takes all of his flocks, all of his herds, all of his camels, all of his donkeys, all the servants he's acquired, all of his kids, all 4 of his wives, and he takes everything and he skedaddles away from Uncle Laban. They almost have war over it. They almost have bloodshed over it, but God prevents it. And he's coming back now to the home country to see his twin brother Esau. There's been no mail service, no postal exchange, no phone calls, no texting, right? No Facebook, no knowledge of what the heck's going on, right? And he's coming back for 20 years. He doesn't know. And he doesn't know if Mom's alive. He doesn't know if Dad's alive. He doesn't know if Esau's alive. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know if Esau still hates him. And he gets to the river, and when he crosses over the river, he knows he's going to be in the promised land. So before he crosses over the river, he takes a couple of his servants. He says, you guys be the forward advance. You go there and let my brother Esau know I'm coming. Tell him what I have. Tell him I'm coming. See how it is. And they come back with a report. And their report is, Esau heard you're coming, and he's coming to meet you with 400 men. Why would he bring 400 men? The only reason he would bring 400 men is to make war and kill and destroy everything Jacob has. And he realizes it's been 20 years, but the feud is still alive and well. And I'm about to be destroyed because his sons are young. He doesn't have near that. He can't fight 400 men. About this time, his sons are teenagers and 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds. That's what he has. But he has lots of goats and lots of cows and lots of sheep. And so he sits and he takes his company and he says, let's divide my possessions in two. 2 wives and all your kids and all these goats and camels and donkeys, you go over there. And you 2 wives and all your kids and goats and camels, you go over there. I'm going to make 2 huge different camps. I'm going to separate you by about a mile. I'm going to set you apart. And that way when Esau comes, whichever one he sees, that's the group he'll kill and he'll obliterate and allow the other camp to get away. I'm only going to be able to save half of what I have. Half of my relationships. And I don't know which one it'll be because I don't know which camp he's going to see first. This is the position he's in. This is the status that he is in. He's like, I'm going to lose everything. If Esau sees me and all this, he'll kill all of us and he'll take everything. I'm trying to find a way to save half of what I have and save half of the lives that are important to me. It's a desperate situation. It's a tough situation. And when he arrives at the camp, the one weird thing was, he and God always seem to have this strange conflict. When you look at the story of Jacob, throughout his whole story, he keeps talking about the God of his fathers, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. And hey, if you will be with me. And when he left the land to go meet Uncle Laban, at one time, he had camped in the desert and he saw this ladder going up, or this staircase going up and down to heaven. He saw angels going up and down and descending between heaven and where he was. And he realized, wow, this is a spiritual place, right? And he sets up this interesting altar, and he says, if you will be my God, if you will take care of me, if you will mind over my fortunes, if you will provide for me a wife, if you will give me all of these possessions, then, God of Abraham and Isaac, you will be my God. And that's where he had been. Then he goes to Laban, spent 20 years there. Rough, hard, difficult years, cheating, lying, stealing back and forth. Very difficult situation. Now he's leaving, and he's about to cross back into the promised land. All of the people around him know one thing about him. There is a spiritual power on you, and God is blessing you, and God is anointing you, and everything you touch turns to gold. And we don't really know why. Other than there must be some power of God on your life. But when they looked at his character, when they talked to him, it's like, yeah, we can't figure out why, but somehow God still has his hand on you. When he comes back to cross over the promised land, this is the second time in his life he will see angels again. And this time he sees the angels, and he's like, wow, there's a group of angels right here as we're arriving. I don't know if everybody saw them or just him or what the deal was, but he realized where these angels are before we cross over the river, before we go into the promised land again. Let's freeze right here. We'll set up camp here. And this is why he calls it Mahanaim. It's 2 camps, meaning a camp of angels and then his camp, the humans that are with him. And ironically, when he hears about Esau coming, he divides his camp into 2 camps. This place is a 2-camp place. God's there. He's there. He's afraid. He's terrified, but he knows God somehow is still with him. And he has this prayer where he says, God, you're the one who told me to do this. You're the one who sent me. You're the one who's bringing me back. And now my life is threatened. Now everything I've ever worked for or wanted or desired or had is about to be taken from me when Esau comes. And I can't defend myself. I don't know how to get out of this situation. I don't have 400 fighting men to take him on. I don't have the power that he has. I don't have the wealth he has. I don't have any of the ability to protect what is mine, and I'm about to lose it all. And it's all going to go down, God, unless you intervene. And if you don't intervene, all is lost. Maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to save half of it somehow. Half my family will escape, half my possessions. And that's just a big maybe. I'm at my wit's end, God, because everything I know how to do, I've done, and it hasn't really worked. And this is the place he's in when he has this prayer. And it's interesting because even then, in this prayer in chapter 32, verses 9 through 12, he still refers to the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. he still doesn't refer to him as his God. He still doesn't say, my God. He still says, okay, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, the family God that my dad and my grandpa worshipped, I'm calling on you. You've been there through the family, you've held on to the family, and I'm asking you to hold on to me now because you were there for Dad and you were there for Grandpa. But he doesn't seem to know him as his God. It's not a personal thing yet, it's a family thing. And he says he's not worthy. That's the first indication in the entire story of Jacob of any humility. Of any time in his whole story, you get no impression at all that he ever thinks he's not worthy. This is the first time in this prayer when he's about to die, when he acknowledges maybe he's not such a great guy after all. And so what he does is he takes his two groups, he divides them, and then he takes some of what he has. He'll take a bunch of, it's about 200 goats, and he puts some sheep together. He puts like 10 males and 20 females and 40 females and 10 males, and he sends them ahead, and he sends them out in like rotation. All right, sheep go first. When you're out about a mile, then send the goats. When they're out about a mile, send the donkeys. When you're out about a mile, send the camels. And his plan is this. He says, when you run into Esau and the 400 men, and Esau asks you who you are, because he's got a servant driving him, right? When he asks who you are and what these are, you tell him, I'm a servant of Jacob, and these goats I have are a gift for his brother Esau. And so when Esau will come across and say, oh, a gift of goats, how nice. Okay, but I'm still mad, and he'll move further on. And a mile later, he'll meet somebody else. What's this? Well, I'm a servant of Jacob, and this is a gift of sheep for his brother Esau. Okay, the sheep. Well, I'm not quite so mad now, right? And a little mile later, here's some donkeys. Well, okay, I'm still peeved, but, maybe I could get over it. See, his plan is, what's going to happen is as Esau gets closer and closer, he'll get more and more stuff coming at him at intervals, and it's going to calm Esau down. That's his plan. So he sends those ahead. He's got his two camps. And he's hanging out, and at this point, he's at his wit's end, because there's nothing left that he can do. He's figured out what he can do. I can appease Esau with gifts. And I've got all this stuff now, and I'll give some of it away, and hopefully that'll be it. And I'm going to make my life happen this way. And at this point, it's interesting. It says, and we're going to jump down to verse 22. And he arose that night, and he took his wives, his two female servants, that would be the two wives and their servants, so it's 4 wives, and his 11 sons, one of them isn't born yet, and he crossed over the ford of Jabbok. So he crosses over the river into the promised land. He took them and sent them over the brook, and he sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. So the first thing he does, on this side of the river, he's got to cross to the promised land, so he sends everybody over. Everything crosses. Gets over there, all the goats, all the children, all the little guys, all the servants, all the tents, everything is on the other side, and he puts it on the other side of the river. Esau's out there, and then he crosses back till he is left alone on the side of the river that's not the promised land. And he's on that side of the river, and a man comes to him. He's all by himself now. And a man comes to him and wrestles with him. And this is really interesting. Let's just kind of read what the story says. It says, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. And now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, meaning Jacob, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Interesting moment, because this man comes and they wrestle all night long. And it's interesting because I looked up the Hebrew for this. That particular Hebrew word for wrestle is only used in this particular passage right here 2 times. It's not used anywhere else in the Bible. And I tried to look it up, like, well, what does that mean that they wrestled, right? Because we know when we think of wrestling, wrestling is control. You see 7 or 8-year-old boys, they like to grapple and roll around on the floor and wrestle. The concept being, I'm going to use my strength and my power to hold you, grip you, confine you, and hold you down in such a way until you acknowledge I'm the stronger one and I am in control here. And of course, the object of the other person is to flip that around and hold this guy down and say, no, I'm going to control you. I will hold you down, confine you, pin you down in such a way that I have the control. See, wrestling is all about controlling the other. And this particular word for wrestle, since you can't find it anywhere else in the Bible, so what does it mean? I'm digging. The only thing I could find on it was the root word for it, the basic word it comes from, means to destroy. So this wasn't a friendly wrestling match. This particular wrestling match was two guys going at it with the intent to destroy or break the other. That's how they're going at it. And they're going at it and going at it, and all night long, there's this wrestling match between Jacob and this unknown guy, trying to see who can be in control here. Who's going to pin the other down and force them to their will. All night long. And they get to the morning, and in the morning time, finally, the man just, okay, enough's enough, and reaches out and strikes the hip and knocks his leg out of joint. And so now Jacob has a dislocated leg, which that's going to hurt a lot. And Jacob's response is to grab the man and hold on to him as tight as he can. And the man says, it's time, let me go. Basically, I've won. I've won. You're broken. I've won. Let me go. And Jacob's response is this interesting thing. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And they're kind of like, wow, there it is. There it is, right? What do you mean bless you? You got all these wives and all these kids. You're a filthy rich man with all of these goats and camels and donkeys that you have. You've survived. Everything you've touched has matured. You've gotten prosperity with everything you've touched. Everything you've done has seen increase. You've never had a failure. You've worked your rear off for everything you have, and everything you have is accumulated to this point. And at this point, yes, you're threatened by Esau, but let's face it, your life's gone pretty good. And why does he say, you need to bless me? I thought 20 years before, he already got the blessing from his dad. And when you sit down and you look at what the blessing was, it's very interesting because it's like, oh, the blessing. The blessing. Something's going on with that that's very unique. He's wrestling there, and you go back and you see what the blessing was that he missed. And you go back, I think it's chapter 27. He goes back to chapter 27, and you can see what the blessing was. And in this case, it's chapter 27, verse 27. And his old dad, who's failing, his health is going bad, he's going to die, and he's blind, he's so old he's blind, when he comes in, he actually sounds like Jacob. So his dad, not being a stupid fellow, says, you don't sound like Esau. Come over here a little bit closer. And see, the difference was that Esau was a hairy guy. And so what Mom had done is taken goat skins and wrapped up Jacob's arms and his neck with goat skins so that when Grab touched him, he would feel hairiness. And then she also took one of Esau's gowns, which, Esau was a guy who went hunting in the field a lot, and he liked to bathe once a month, whether he needed it or not. And so she took one of his gowns and wrapped it around Jacob, and then she made this savory dish out of goat meat, but it had all the right spices in it, so it was hidden, so it tasted like, wild venison or something. And so Jacob's bringing this in, dressed in the goat skins, got it around his neck, got it around his arms. He's got the dish of meat that's a fake venison. It's actually goat with the right spices on it to make it taste like venison. And he's got on Esau's robe. And so Dad's like, come closer. And so when he comes closer, blind Dad, grabbed his arm and felt the hairiness and pulled him close and smelled Esau. Oh, I bet everybody smelled Esau. And he goes, okay, it doesn't sound right, but you're the right one. And he gives him this blessing. Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. The way we would say it in our culture is, may God give you the biggest bank account. May God make it so that everything you touch sees increase. May God make your stock portfolio increase. May God make it so that all of the wealth you will ever need to accomplish anything in your life, He bestows on you. This is a spiritual power that Dad's passing down. He's passing down the fullness of all the earth and the creation has to give that God had made. He's passing it down to this son. So when this son goes through life, there will never be famine. There's not going to be these difficulties. He's passing down this blessing of prosperity. And then he says, let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. He's saying, may you be the type of person that's a leader amongst others. May you be the one who leads the charge. May God have such an anointing on your life that you are not a follower, you're a leader, and people will come to you and they will say, I need your wisdom, I need your insight, I need what you have to say, that you'll basically be famous and popular. and nations bow down to you means whole ethnic groups, whole groups of people will come to you and say, we need your advice, we need your wisdom, we want to follow you. We so respect you that we want what you have to offer. It's going to be this incredible power of leadership over other human beings. He says, be master over your brethren. It's going to make him chief of the family. You are the head of the whole family. You are the clan leader. Let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. And this is the blessing that Jacob has contrived to get and steal from his brother. It's the inheritance. It's not just the inheritance of the camels and the donkeys. It's the inheritance of the anointing of God that is placed on a life so that that life floats and moves in leadership and in prestige and in honor and in glory and in prosperity and in power and in influence. It is the inheritance. All that God has to give. It was on Abraham's life. It fell down to Isaac's life. Now Isaac's going to pass it on to one of his sons, and Isaac's intended to pass it on to Esau, but at this moment he doesn't know it. He's passing it on to Jacob. And then Jacob has to flee, but here he is 20 years later, holding on to this guy I think it's in a tent. I don't really know, but he's at least by the side of the river, holding on to a guy saying, I will not let go of you until you bless me. Somewhere in Jacob's mind and heart, he knew, I didn't get the real thing. Back with Dad and the goat skins and the fake venison and the wrong robe. I got the blessing in a weird way, but really, I didn't get the blessing. I was pretending to be someone I was not. I was pretending to be something other than who I really was. And I knew who I really was. And I was faking, trying to get the glory and the power and the wonder and the prosperity and the honor and the prestige and everything that comes with walking with God. I was trying to get that. That's what I really wanted. But I knew as I was doing it that I was pretending to be somebody I wasn't so that I could get it. Here he is 20 years later now, hanging on to this angel, this guy, this person. We don't know who the story is yet. And he's saying, I'm not going to let go until I get the real thing this time. Until I get the real thing, I will not let go. That old blessing wasn't true. It wasn't really mine. Now, sure, he could look at his goats and his herds. He could look at the wives he's had. He's had a lot of conflict with them. He could look at the sons he's had. He'll have conflict with them, and that's going to continue on. That family's going to be super dysfunctional as time goes on. And what he's looking for is for God to finally come and say, I want the real thing. I will not let go of you until I get the true inheritance. Back to chapter 32. It's interesting what the guy says. And actually, never mind. I won't say this. It's interesting because he's fighting it out with God. Here's what the guy says in chapter 32. The man's got him now dislocated socket, hanging in there. He won't let go, though. He's not going to let go. That's 31. In chapter 32, he says, so he said, the man, he says, I will not let go unless you bless me. Verse 27. So the man says, what is your name? He said, Jacob. For you and I, it's like, Oh, but let me tell you, there it is. There it is in the story. The man says, oh, you want me to bless you? You want me to give you the power, the prestige, the honor, the glory, the leadership, the influence, the wealth that will come with having my power on you? Okay, I'm about to. What's your name? And you know what he has to say? He has to say, well, my name is Trickster. That's what Jacob means. Literally, it means he who grabs the heel. Because when he and the brother were being born, Esau came out first. And when Jacob came out, he was literally hanging on to Esau's heel. And so when they came out together, they almost came out together. Boom, boom, right? And Esau was holding on, or Jacob was holding on to Esau's heel. So his literal name is heel grabber. And that is a Hebrew euphemism for somebody who trips others up. Who tricks and deceives other people to trip them up. All of his life, he has gone by who he really is. Trickster, heel grabber, person who trips other people up. So here's the man saying, oh, you want my blessing. Who are you? He has to admit, I'm the guy who connives and schemes and plots and plans and manipulates other people to get my way. That's who I am. That's what my name means. It means Jacob. And that's got to be a crazy ironic moment, because I think he's laying on the ground with his hip dislocated and he's holding as tight as he can onto this guy's legs or something. He will not let go. No matter how much beating he takes, he will not let go of this guy. And he says, not till you bless me. Okay, I'm ready to bless you. What's your name? All right. My name is manipulator. My name is cheater of others. My name is lying fraud to get my way. My name is guy who likes to deceive. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. That's who I was 20 years ago when I tried to get the blessing. That's who I've been for 20 years with my Uncle Laban, where we made a deal to have the sheep come a certain way, and then I schemed and plotted to make sure he wouldn't get any of his goats bred properly and only mine would. That's who I am. I'm a schemer and a plotter and a deceiver of others. And I want you to bless me. And at this point, I think that's when it all sort of came out. I'm admitting who I really am before you now, and I'm admitting it ain't so good. And I love what the guy says. He says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. And then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. In that moment, he says, oh, so your name is lying, cheating, deceiver who tricks other people, heel grabber, guy who trips up others. You're not going to be that guy anymore. That's who you've been. And by now, he's probably in his mid-40s. For over 40 years, that's who you've been. You're not going to be that guy anymore. You're going to be somebody different. You're going to be a different kind of personality. You're going to be a different person. I'm going to call you by a different name. Your new name will be God Fights. That's what it literally means. God Fights. Which is kind of like, okay, why does he call him that, right? And it's like, well, for one reason, he spent his whole life fighting God. He spent his whole life knowing what God really wanted out of him and doing something else. Knowing what God would provide, knowing what God would bless, knowing the ways and the paths that God has for people to do things, and him doing, yeah, I hear that, but I'm going to do it my way instead. I'm going to do my own thing instead. And I'm with you, God. I'm not really against you. I just don't trust you enough to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way, and my way is to manipulate and scheme and use other people to get what I want. I mean, realistically, you ever thought of this, that on his wedding night he couldn't identify his wife? That's how he got tricked. What kind of guy doesn't know who the girl is who he's in bed with on his wedding night? What kind of relationship is that? Right? Well, she had a veil on. It's like, look, he didn't look at her. He didn't talk to her. He didn't spend time with her. He didn't get to know her at that moment. He just consummated the marriage and woke up in the morning and realized he had the wrong girl. What kind of guy is that? What kind of man is that? Answer? Not a very good one. Not a good man at all. That's how he ended up with the wife he really wanted. He'd been tricked into the first wife because he wasn't such a good guy. And now his name is changed to God Fights. It's funny because all of his life, he wants what God has to give. But all of his life, he still tries to do it his way. All of his life, he wants the things that God has for him. He wants the blessing. He wants what Grandpa Abraham had and Dad Isaac had. He wants the peace and the comfort and the joy and the prosperity, the influence and the leadership and the power that they have, but he can't get it. No matter what he does, he can't get it. And the reason is because he tries to get it on his own terms. He lied and cheated, and now he's at this place where God's saying, okay, you're not going to be that person anymore. You're Yisrael. Which means he who fights God. Does it mean someone God fights for or someone who fights with God? Because it could go either way. And the answer is probably both. Both. God's going to fight for you now, and you're a guy who has fought with God. And you fought with men. You spend your whole life as a fighter, as an antagonist, as someone who tries to use and manipulate other people. It's not going to work anymore. You're going to be something else. One commentator said, Jacob's pattern of life had to be radically changed. In saying his name, Jacob had to reveal his whole nature. Throughout Jacob's entire life, he had been dragging God's blessings out under all circumstances for his own use, under his own steam. He was too self-willed and too proud to let the blessing be given to him. So God fights was now his name. God, the real proprietor of the land, opposed his entering as Jacob. In his self-will and his own strength, he could never enter the land. The point of the story for the new nation of Israel that would come from Egypt into the land of promise is clear. Israel's ultimate victory would come not by the usual ways by which a nation's gain power, but through the power of the divine blessing. Self-sufficiency is incompatible with the work of God in any age. Faith alone overcomes the world. Your new name is no longer deceiver. Your new name is God fights. That's who you're going to be, because that's who you've always been. You're not going to be the manipulating liar anymore. You're not going to be the cheater of others. You're not going to be the guy who's got to do it by himself. I will do it for you. And then he asks, he says, okay, what's your name? And it's like the guy standing over and says, you're kidding me, right? You know who I am. You know who I am. In verse 30 says, so Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. He knew who he was. He was wrestling who many scholars believe would be Jesus before Jesus was born in the Virgin Mary's womb. He's wrestling pre-incarnate Jesus. God himself, the second person of the Trinity, came down, grabbed hold of him, pinned him down, wrestled with him all night long. The word wrestle meaning to destroy, and why not? Manipulators worth destroying. I'm not going to preserve a manipulator. I'm going to destroy a manipulator, but I'll raise up out of the manipulator's place someone else who is new and strong and powerful, and someone who I can give my blessing to because he's a changed man. So he calls the place Peniel, which means face of God. In Hebrew, the word for presence and face are the same word. To be in the presence of God is to be in the face of God. Kind of cool, isn't it, when you think about it? When you're like, God, I want your presence in the room. God, I want to worship you and be in your presence. It's like saying your presence is face to face. It's intimacy. It's God taking someone's face in their hands and looking right at you, just like that. So the word for presence and the word for face are the exact same word in the Old Testament. God's face right with him. I submit to you that the reason that first slide, or that last slide, that you saw, why we hover in the zone, and we don't know why we can't go forward, and the old ways don't work, and the old things aren't doing it for us anymore, is because we reach a place in our life when God says, yeah, I don't want you just to go mechanically through the motions. I want to change who you are. And in order to change who you are, I have to get you to admit who you really are. And I've known a lot of people in my lifetime who tried to hide under the family faith. Come to Christ because it was what the family did. Mom took us to church. Dad took us to church. Well, my family's always been Christians. You know what? I've known a lot of people dressed in goat skins pretending to be something they were not, hoping the blessing of God would fall on them. And in the end, there'll come a point in life when you realize what God's after is to say, yeah, that won't do anymore. You can't get into the promised land pretending to be someone else. You can only come into the promised land as who you are. And the promised land is God's prosperity and God's joy and God's peace. All that God has to give. All that He has. And He says, you get the inheritance from me when you come in as who you really are, not pretending to be somebody else. And by the way, when you finally admit who you really are, then we can talk about that. And for some of us, there it is. And we get in those points when it's like, well, what do? Usually most of us do one of two things. We either wrestle with God or we run away. And we don't have anything to do with Him anymore. Most people do the latter. They quit, they run away, they give up. And they say, I tried God, I did it for years, I went to church for years, and I just got tired of it. I got tired of worship. We'd sing the songs, but I didn't feel anything. They tried. Got to the place where they say, I just quit. That's what most people I've observed do. A handful of others, those who have breakthrough, are the ones who say, I got to the point where I realized The answers were no longer in the simple, I need to attend church, read my Bible, and pray and worship. But God needed to do something huge inside of me. And in order for God to do something huge inside of me, I had to figure out who I really was and why it was I do life the way I do it. Why I go through the motions I go through. Why do the same old conflicts keep repeating themselves in my life? There comes a point when you realize there's a common denominator for all the trouble that you've ever had in your life. The common denominator is you. Right? I've had a bunch of girlfriends. I've had a bunch of boyfriends now. And you know what? I just, you go on, it's like, yeah, you know what? All those people had one common denominator in who they dated. Right? Maybe you need to look at yourself and say, hey, maybe there's something about me, right? Or maybe like I've had this job and that job and this job and that job. I've only had bad bosses. I've had bad companies and bad bosses I've worked for. It's like, you know what? And all those companies had one common denominator in their employee. And that was you. And maybe all those bad bosses and all those bad companies would look back and say, yeah, there was a problem, and the problem wasn't them. At some point, you stop and you look at yourself and you say, I have these reoccurring problems, and I've changed jobs, and I've changed relationships, and I've changed places I've lived, and I've changed what I've done, I've changed how I dress, but somehow I keep having these problems, and the answer is, oh, it's you, and it needs to go deeper. You got to figure out what are the goat skins you're wearing to pretend to be somebody you're not, so that you can get something from God that He's not about to give, a fraud. We all hit that wall. We all hit that place when we realize, oh my gosh, I've been a Christian for 20 years and I'm a fraud. Not in all areas, not in everything I've ever done, but in some pretty big areas I've been deceiving God and deceiving me and pretending God doesn't notice. Or pretending I have this thing on the backside and I have this life I live when no one's looking and thinking God doesn't mind because everybody does it. And then God says, oh yeah, well I know that. I know that you do that, but you know what? You want the blessing? You want to enter the promised land under the blessing? Yeah, you don't get the blessing, the inheritance that God has, pretending to be something you're not. Let's talk about who you really are, and then see if we could change your name to God Fights. Because God Fights are people that hold on. God Fights are people who say, I need to be in the place where everything I've ever done is not enough and I need more. Instead of running away, it's like, I'm going to try a church I've never tried before. I've never set foot in a Pentecostal church. I'll go to one. I've never gone down to the healing rooms. I'll go to the healing rooms. I've never seen a Christian counselor. I'll see a Christian counselor. I've never gone to a huge worship celebration for 2 days. I'll go to one. I'm going to hang on to God until He blesses me. See, most of us let go of God and say, bless me, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just stand where I am, and I'm going to let go of you and say, bless me. See, Jacob got his name changed to God Fights because he wouldn't let go. And for some of us, you hit that stage of life, it's like the answer is, don't let go. And if what you have done up to now isn't working for the future, do something different. There are incredible people out there who've learned stuff about God that you don't know and I don't know. Do you know how many books there are to read by incredibly spiritually astute, astounding people who've had experiences with God that will blow your mind? Do you read their books? Right? Do you just stay in the same genre all the time? I've had friends I've talked about this who one secret church to another secret church to another secret church, and after 5 years, you're like, oh, it's all the same. I'm like, look, you can't eat at McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and tell me you've had all the cuisine there is in the world. Right? At some point, go try some Italian food. Go eat a steak. The same thing spiritually. If you've been in the same genre, the same rut, the same thing over and over and over, at some point, and I'm talking within the realms of Christianity, don't wander outside that, but within the realms of Christianity, there's Greek Orthodox people and Catholic people. There's Catholic mystics who will blow your mind. Read St. Teresa of Avila. Man, her stuff's incredible. St. John of the Cross. Profound stuff. There's Greek Orthodox guys who could teach you things about silence and meditative prayers. There's Pentecostals who could teach you things about moving and listening to the Holy Spirit and hearing words of prophecy that would go over you where God speaks directly to you about your life. There are Baptists and Presbyterians who could open up and expose knowledge of the Bible and the way it all ties together in the intricacies of words. They could bring it all together and you go, oh my gosh, this is rich. See, and those are the people who are wrestling with God. They're saying, I will not let go till I learn that. That's what God wants from all of us. It's why in that last little chart, and I don't even know if you can go back to that one, Danny, if it's too far away, that last little chart, it looked like the next leap was up so high. That one. But the next leap isn't up so high. The next leap is a different kind of activity altogether. And some of you are already like, let's be honest, some of us are kind of like, well, I'm not even at that level, Rob. I'm still at the level where I don't really quite know how to worship. I barely know anything about the Bible. I'm still kind of learning it. It's like, okay, start there. For you, the next leap isn't, going and exploring all that's out there. Your next leap is, I've got to figure out how to worship. Because what I find with most people is, they start to feel spiritually blah, or they commit a sin, or they're living wrong. The first thing they do is stop going to church. Where else are you going to worship? Where else are you going to be reminded about the things of God? When your life starts fading, the last thing you want to do is stop going to church. It's the thing you need to get back in and say, oh yeah, wait a minute. I need that corporate worship. I need that experience of prayer around me. If I can't pray, I need to at least be in the environment of prayer where people are praying. If I can't pray, I at least need to find someone else who will pray for me. But what people do instead is they separate themselves and remove themselves entirely until they're way outside. I haven't worshiped, I haven't prayed, I haven't sought God in any way, I haven't read my Bible, and I'm wondering why God won't give me the blessing. That's a simple answer. You got to get back where God is. And that's the next leap up for some. It's saying God has plans for us, for all of us. And the weird thing is, we would be content to just lie still and be where we're at. And God's not content in that for us. Really, that's the weird thing. And usually these moments, by the way, are broken with crisis, just like Jacob. Major crisis will hit your life. And if you find yourself in a major crisis, it's a good chance God is actually pinning you to the ground to say, let's talk about your name. If you're in a major crisis, sometimes the thing to do is not to say, God, how would you get out of this crisis? The answer is to say, hey, God, are you pinning me down? And God's saying, yeah, I was going to ask you something. Who are you? I mean, really, who are you? Maybe that's the question God's asking. And He's such a relentless God that He will not stop until He gets His answer, until He asks that question. He wants more for us than we want for ourselves. We'd be content to let it lie, and He's like, oh yeah, I'm not content to let it lie. I have much more to give you, much more to do with you, much more transformation and change and power, much more glory. I have so much more glory to give you that I will not let you lie because I love you. That's where God's at. Let's pray. Why don't you stand with me as we close? Okay, Lord, here we are. Oh, some of us have been in a season like this where we've had to admit that we were pretending to be something we weren't. Some of us are admitting right now that's who we are. I didn't even know who I am. Some of us are saying, I really don't know who I am. And I need you, God, to reveal it to me. But we can make one vow to you that's real and honest and genuine. Lord, this morning we vow to hold on to you. No matter what, with all our might, we will hold on to you. We will wrestle with you until we get our answer. Until you break us and change us, make us into who we need to be. Make us fit to receive the promised land in our own lives and in our own ways, Lord. And all of us have a slightly different destiny on that one. But you know who we are. And so Jesus put the passion in us, put the hunger in us, put the desire in us, that we will not let go of you until you bless us. Lord, this is our prayer. We ask it in the name of Jesus Christ, who is King of kings and Lord of lords, the Most High God. Amen. God bless you. We'll see you next week.